UN's report. It called it distorted, unfair and ideologically slanted, but it added it would study it thoroughly. And it says the Catholic Church is committed to protecting children from abuse. Jack Valero is from Catholic Voices, a project aimed at improving the Church's representation in the media. He joins us live from London. What is your response to the UN report, Jack?
Hello. I think it's a terrible report, full of so many mistakes. It's hard to know where to start. I would summarize the problems with it in three areas. First, it takes absolutely no account of this history of abuse reform that's been going on in the Catholic Church in the last 12 years, since 2001. The guidelines and procedures that have been developed to tackle this problem, which was very real, very terrible problem, things that happened in the Catholic Church in the 80s, and 70s and 80s. And well, this is what is not true, because the procedures and guidelines that have been developed in the Catholic Church are the best in the world. This has been said by governments in the West. The Catholic Church has been the catalyst for change. And in the UK, it has led the change in many institutions, in schools, in local authorities, in other institutions. So,
okay,
and none of this is in the report. If that is indeed the
case, how come nobody has been brought to court, for instance? How come there's nobody there who's paying
Lots of people.
For his crime?
Hundreds of priests are in prison. Millions of pounds of dollars have been paid to victims. This is just absolutely untrue. It's incredible that a UN report could say this thing. It brings no credit to the UN at all.
Well,
and this is just the first problem.
The UN report found that nuns and priests who spoke out were ostracized, that priests who have been found guilty haven't faced up to their crimes. Instead, they've been moved around, as we've been seeing happening for decades. That very little has indeed changed.
That is just not true. That priests were moved from parish to parish in the 80s, and that stopped in the late 90s and certainly in 2001, when the new procedures were established in the UK and the USA and then were copied around the world. That stopped happening. So if a priest is accused of abuse nowadays, this is immediately dealt with. And if he's found guilty, he's laicized, he stops being a priest and is sent to prison. And it's mandatory reporting, and the police is always called. So all these things that used to happen in the past are no longer happening. This is the surprising thing in the report. But the most worrying thing about this report is this, that it tries to impose an ideology of gender and sexuality on the Catholic Church. It says, for example, the Catholic Church should change its teaching on abortion, on contraception, on homosexuality.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in there, because I mean that's a whole different issue. What I'm talking about is the fact of child abuse and the fact that it hasn't been addressed. And many abuse groups confirm that. They say that very little has changed. I mean, isn't the big problem here that even though you say changes have been implemented, the perception is that it hasn't? Well, maybe the perception needs to change, but it certainly has changed completely in the way that the cases are handled. Now, for example, in the USA, the rules were established in 2002. In the UK in 2001, they included mandatory reporting, and all cases from then on have been dealt with as soon as people have been accused. But retrospectively, this hasn't happened, though, has it?
Pardon?
Retrospectively, this hasn't happened.
Yes, of course. If the accusation is from 1960, that is also investigated, and the people are searched for, and if they're still alive, they're put in prison. The problem is that sometimes these terrible things were done by people who have already died, so there's only a limited amount that you can do. But victims have been compensated. I mean, the new committee that Pope Francis has established in December of last year was to ensure that victims were looked after, because he said the legal side and the procedural side is all in place, and we're leading the fight against child abuse. But are we looking after the victims as well as we should? And this is what the committee is looking at now. So we want to ensure that victims from the past, you know, from 30, 40, 50 years ago, they're still looked after and the proper compensation is paid to them, and that is done properly.
Well, that's certainly good to hear. The UN also suggests that by 2017, everything that has been put forward is implemented by the Church. Is that going to be possible?
Well, because, as I say, there's so many errors in this report, and many of the things that they say that the Church should do, the Church is already doing.
then, you know, whether they take that as recommendation or they say, well, actually, that's already happening, that's already happening, that's already happening. If I were you, if I were the Vatican, I would withdraw from this convention, because this report is just so outrageous in its implications, the things that haven't been done when they have been done, that I think that they should be rejected and the report should be rewritten.
Well, on those words, Jack Valero, good to talk to you from Catholic Voices.
Thank you.
In Syria,